congratulations on being the pointy end of the spear on free speech.
Well, to you as well. I mean, this was in many cases a very dismal year for free speech, but I also think there were some positives that we'll get to, in that how often we had the opportunity specifically to raise the alarm and sound the alarm about these issues. So the debate clip, the glory days of the campaign, was just one of several examples this year where we really got to shine the spotlight on that. So it was unfortunate in some ways, but very fortunate in others.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you care about that. And I know we all say we care about freedom of speech. Certainly, if you ask any journalist, they'll all say, oh, yes, 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 I care. And they'll do that because they know they're supposed to say that. And they care about their own free speech. But it's tougher to care about free speech for someone else, especially someone else you might find irritating or even contrary to your own views. And that's what I think is slipping away. I think that journalists are very fastidious about their own freedoms. But if it's a rival journalist, especially in this age of social media censorship and bailout money, I think most other journalists have decided, yeah, they don't care so much about that. Do you think I'm being too pessimistic, Andrew?
Well, I think the answer to that is always it depends. I mean, there are going to be individual voices that do care and that are on side with that, and there are going to be at the same time people that don't. And more importantly, I think the institutions themselves are growing less supportive of free speech. I mean, one of the highlights of my year, quite frankly, was being in London for the Global Conference for Media Freedom alongside you and Sheila Gunn-Reid of Rebel. And we saw in that little few days of the conference, reporters from the mainstream media actually stand up for press freedom. As many people remember, we have the standing up for free speech and press freedom rights for Sheila and I when the Ministry of Chrystia Freeland's office was trying to block us from a press conference. And that was a profoundly impactful moment when the Globe and Mail, CTV, CBC, Al Jazeera, English, they're all standing firm and saying, listen, we're not covering this press conference unless everyone is there. And I think that that moment was a hugely positive one. But you fast forward a couple of months, you're in the federal court, Candace Malcolm's in the federal court, I'm holed up in a hotel room in Ottawa wondering if I'll get to go to the debate. And the sounds we heard from the mainstream media were non-existent. It was silence from them. Yeah. And I think that we need more like that London story and less like the Ottawa story.
Yeah, that London story was truly amazing. For one flicker of a moment, I thought that maybe the tide was turning for freedom. And it was at a media freedom conference. And the fact that Chrystia Freeland was trying to block journalists at that conference, I think that, combined with the fact that it was you and Sheila, so it seemed like it was not just one person, it was a whole thing. Let me play a clip of that because Sheila caught most of that on tape. Here, take a look at this.
So, Global Mail, Global, CTV, Al Jazeera, CBC, and the National Economic News. And the others?
What about the rest?
The rest of us?
The rest will have to see that.
No, I think we all go.
That's nonsense.
No,
that is nonsense.
We'll go.
We're not going.
Let's take us to the room and we can see if we can. Then we're not going, Brittany. We're just not. We're all going. This is a media freedom conference.
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
We just don't do that.
Yeah, we're not going then.
I thought that was a beautiful moment. But as you pointed out a moment ago, when we were in court in Federal Court of Canada in Toronto, there were no interveners. And I'm old enough to know, Andrew, that it was only 10 years ago that if one media company got in trouble in a way that could set a bad precedent, they all went in as a coalition of journalists. Like, you would often see one lawyer who would go to the court to intervene and say, Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of a coalition of the National Post and the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Sun and CTV and CBC. Like, it was almost a standing order that everyone, all for one and one for all, you wouldn't see 5 lawyers for 5 newspapers, but you would see one excellent lawyer who was instructed by all the big media companies to fight for the precedent. That day is gone, Andrew. I mean, maybe on some matters, but it was just your lawyer and our lawyers in that room fighting the government lawyers by ourselves. No other media and not even civil liberties groups like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. That made me say, that took away all the love I felt at that London free speech event and replaced it with sadness.
Well, I will say, to the credit of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, they did put a message of support out near the end of the case. I think the case had been heard, but the decision hadn't been announced yet, and they've been supportive since. But I do agree that there was a time when these things would be a given, that press freedom's under attack. It's like a rampage of press and other media companies to the courtroom to say we're standing on principle, and that hasn't happened now. And I do think that the concerns I would raise on this are that everyone's so focused on the context of what happens if we support rebels' right to press freedom. I don't know if we want to do that. And that's very dangerous, because the whole point of freedom is that it's not supposed to be contingent on whether you like or dislike the person, the outlet, or the position. And now it is. And we saw this after the London example, where people were actually Twitter harassing the reporters who stood up for Sheila and I, because they're saying, oh, my goodness, this is just this right-wing media conspiracy, which I find laughable for many reasons. They're legitimizing rebels, same as when you had your op-ed on press freedom in the Globe and Mail.
Oh, right.
Again, I'd say that's a win for free speech, you having that. But then people say, oh, but you're legitimizing them. And they're more concerned about what it means to their culture battle than what it means for the broader culture.
That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show, which is a show I do every day. I do a monologue, interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at premium.rebelnews.com.